When it comes to Silent Hill, a lot of fans look at the series almost split into two types of Silent Hill games, with that being the Team Silent versions, which encompass Silent Hills 1 to 4, and then the Western developed Silent Hill games, which include games like Origins, Downpour, Shattered Memories, and Homecoming. And when it comes to the Western style games, there's definitely a lot of different opinions on what those games did well or didn't do so well on. But the one that I seem to see that probably gets the most criticism is Silent Hill Homecoming. And in this video, I'm going to go over some of those criticisms and also go over some of the things that I believe that game did really well. So let's take a look. Just to give a heads up, there might be some spoilers throughout this video, so if you're intending on playing through this game or haven't ever played this game and don't want it spoiled, I may end up highlighting some things that might detract from that type of experience. But the first thing I want to address is that the game starts off, you play as Alex Shepard, going back into a town called Shepherd's Glen, and it's apparently like a sister town to Silent Hill. And upon your arrival, you find out that your little brother Josh is missing. And one of the things that kind of really marks the Western Silent Hills different from the Japanese Silent Hills is that the Japanese Silent Hill games, they feel like outsiders essentially trying to understand and convey American culture in this town that's faced tragedy essentially. And as a result, you get a lot of very weird, bizarre, and almost disturbing elements that come from a lot of Japanese horror ingrained in something that for, I assume, Westerners feels somewhat familiar, which is the rural small town and the sort of people that inhabit it. And a lot of ways, the original Silent Hill games, even all the way up till 4, feel like a nice, weird mesh between Twin Peaks and classic Japanese horror films, and it works really, really well. And I think out of the gate, what you kind of realize with Homecoming is that that approach doesn't really seem to be there anymore. You don't get that same feeling that you got with the first 4 Silent Hill games, where it felt like something incredibly disturbing was always lingering or happening throughout the world. And as a result, what this game starts to feel like, just even out of the gate, is almost like a fan game based off of the Silent Hill franchise from people who don't truly understand what Team Silent was trying to convey with those games. And I will argue, however, that I was not against the storyline in this game. I actually thought the story between Alex Shepard and Josh worked really well. The stuff I really disliked, however, is not uncommon for many of the detractors of this game, is the almost forced Silent Hill imagery that fans who enjoyed the franchise had come to expect, like having Pyramid Head pop up every so often. However, they did rename him the Boogeyman, as I understand, to try to separate him but not separate him in this story. And even just having weird direct nods to the franchise with the sexy nurses and stuff, to me, just really took away from making this feel like its own thing, right? Like you had Silent Hill 4, for example, which to me did a phenomenal job of really amping up the disturbing that people came to expect, but also doing it in a way that separated it from Silent Hills 3, 2, and 1, whereas Homecoming feels like it's trying to not even give a nod, but try to play too much fan service to both the Silent Hill movie and the Silent Hill 2 game, which for a lot of people was the flagship title. And I think out of the gate, that seriously took away from a lot of the disturbing or unique horror elements that people come to expect with each new Silent Hill title. And it really did feel like, when you're playing through this game, almost like fan service. Now, with that being said, talking about the monsters directly, I will argue that of all the Western Silent Hill games, this one is on par with Origins for at least having unique monster designs that go beyond trying to create something entirely the same as Silent Hill previous games, but also stick with the more disturbing characters as you progress. Now, I need to clarify what I mean by that. The sexy nurses, the pyramid head appearances, those are all fan service. But as you get into the boss fights, I would argue that Silent Hill Homecoming actually did probably the best job of any of the Western developed Silent Hills in crafting really unique monsters for these boss fights. And I thought they tied neatly into the storyline of what was going on with the children who were sacrificed. And I thought that that actually worked incredibly well. That was probably one of Silent Hill Homecoming's strongest points. Now, where I have a knock at these monsters actually doesn't have to do with their design. It has to do with the weirdly over-the-top combat that seems either entirely cheap on your end or entirely cheap on the monster's end. And the way the combat was designed was trying to keep it a little bit more streamlined, almost like a Resident Evil 4, I guess. But by introducing this weird, almost combo system where you just spam the attack button, and sometimes you can glitch it out to the point that you're unstoppable. However, on the inverse, enemies appear to be able to do the same, which can lead to almost what it feels like randomized chance encounters where the enemies are almost feeling like they can overwhelm you quickly or you can overwhelm them quickly. Granted, you get to the attack button quicker. It's a very odd system, and there's kind of the hilarious spin attack that Alex does in the combat that just seems really weird and wonky for a Silent Hill game. And the gunplay, I guess, is acceptable. I'm not going to tell you that it's bad or good. It just, I guess, works. And it felt like, really to me, like this game was trying to almost pander to the Resident Evil 4 type audience who came to enjoy and appreciate the behind-the-shoulder perspective of shooting that you had. But ultimately, it feels wonky, I guess is the best way to put it. Now, with that being said, I did like the inclusion of gash wounds that happen on enemies when you stab them and those sorts of things. I thought that was a nice touch, but ultimately, I would argue the combat fell pretty flat. Now, as you get through the game, I will argue that there are some very nice environments throughout. Now, there's some environments that they seem a little mixed, like the cemetery area to me seemed very overdone. You also have to backtrack through it a couple times. However, as you get through the different areas, I liked the way the Otherworld was designed. I actually thought it was really impressive the way they were able to make the Otherworld change from the normal world into the Otherworld. I thought this Silent Hill did a very good job of that. However, it was a bit more of a nod to the movie, but honestly, as far as the technology goes on the 360 era, using the Unreal 3 engine, I thought it worked pretty well. And I thought the Otherworld itself looked good, and I thought that actually some of those areas that you traversed through were probably some of the best in this game. And some of the different territories as well that you go through also seemed relatively unique, and I thought they had a lot of charm to them, and some areas even felt like you were back in the old school Silent Hill experience. And I think those are good things. I think those are things that these developers tried very hard to do, and I think in many ways they succeeded. However, there's one problem. For some reason, there seems to be a very mixed approach to the way your flashlight works. For some reason, in some areas, it seems like it actually lights and illuminates things. And in other areas, it appears that your flashlight just doesn't really light up much. And that leads to a lot of, I wouldn't even say scary experiences, but almost frustrating experiences where you hear the radio going off, but you're not really sure where an enemy is because it's almost too hard to see them. And that made exploration in those areas as well less exciting because I felt like I wasn't really able to uncover as much as I wanted to visually using the game's flashlight, which to me was honestly just frustrating. Now, As you progress through the game, there are a lot of random bits of, how do I say this? Random characters who kind of come and play, and the problem that I found ultimately with going through Homecoming again is that a lot of these characters just don't really seem that interesting and probably deliver some of the flattest performances I've seen in a Silent Hill game. And I'm being forward in that. Some of the previous Silent Hill games almost had a cheesy Japanese to English dialogue systems that didn't always work the best or sound the best, but they worked. Whereas in Homecoming, I felt like these were some of the worst performances I'd seen in a Silent Hill game as far as the characters go.
You've been gone too long.
Yeah. Where is everybody? Where's Josh?
I don't know. Your father went to look for him.
And it felt like some of these characters were almost, how do I say this? Were almost put in as almost like an afterthought. And it really detracted, in my opinion, from what was going on in this game, which was an older brother searching for his younger brother, trying to ask people what's going on, and everybody seems to have some of the most flat and almost out of context performances that I've seen in this series. And I don't know if that was intentional from the developers, like they were trying to keep with the almost bizarre dialogue choices that kind of added a bit of charm to the original 4 Silent Hill games, but I sincerely did not think that worked at all in this title. And that also leads to almost a bigger issue with the game, and that's how the game tries way too hard to incorporate the deep cult elements into the storyline. I understood the premise, and I get that the point of the game was that child sacrifice was to prevent tragedy from occurring in Shepherd's Glen, and this added kind of a unique element, but you end up getting directly involved with the cult, I guess, is the best way to put it. And it seems like it's pretty much a direct harkening back to the Silent Hill film. And as the last quarter of the game progresses, it seems like this goes from a bizarre disaster that's happening with all these different figures being punished by manifestations of their guilt to just some weird, almost Saw-esque type game where people are just getting tortured. And I'm unsure if that was Konami's way of pushing the Western developers to try to appeal more to a Western audience. But if that was the case, Konami did a fantastic job of making this feel way less like Silent Hill and way more like its own IP, which, as far as I understand, should not have been the approach that they took. And at the end, and reflecting on Silent Hill Homecoming, I do think deep down, if you kind of look past some of the odd design choices and sometimes confused design choices, there is a good story to be had. I did like the ending, and I did like the ultimate wrap up to the storyline. However, I felt like the game tried way too hard to play homage to all of the previous games in a way that detracted from this feeling like its own thing. And I felt like some of the dialogue choices and the actual characters that you come across don't really add a whole lot, and if anything, almost made the game feel cheesy. And the combat itself just really did not work that well, and as a result, you end up with a game that feels less like a true Silent Hill release and more like some sort of weird fan game that almost should have never hit the shelves.